Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization by Stephan. Chapter 5. Kinsey shone a penlight into the eyes of the patient sitting in the wheelchair. The pupils completely failed to react. Kinsey stood back. Drool ran down from the patient's open mouth. "Nobody home," declared the male nurse. "This guy's ready for D-Wing." He motioned for an orderly to wheel the patients away. Mark and Will watched the scene from their seats in the hospital common room. Both guys were pretty young, about the same age as Lori, and neither of them looked like they really belonged here. Granted, Mark looked pretty intense, and one of his eyes had a slight tick, but you could find people in much worse condition any night in any downtown of America. Mark's eye twitched again as he watched the orderly roll the vegetable out of the large open room. "If I turn out like that," he said to his friend, "put a pillow over my face, will ya?" Will made no attempt to reply. He got the message, and he agreed 100%. What they'd just witnessed was pretty normal for this place. The guy in the wheelchair was only the latest in a long line of psychiatric patients who'd simply given up on life. Will had seen them slip away. One day they're fine, talking, laughing, reasonably normal. Then slowly they turn into zombies, their personalities fading day by day into nothing. But it only happened to inmates who'd been here the longest. So maybe that was the answer. Get fixed and get the hell out before the Weston rot set in. Though Will looked more calm and more relaxed than his blonde-haired friend, his stare had a distinctly damaged quality. Will had been through some pretty bad experiences over the last few years. They both had. But while their time at Weston Hills had made Mark more erratic, it made Will more determined. Will was a boy in need of a purpose, some direction, something he was never going to find at Weston Hills. God, how much longer were they going to have to stay here? A blue light came on over on the far wall. Beneath the light was a reinforced glass window to the hospital dispensary, a small office where the night shift nurse could while away the hours in front of a portable television. The dispensary was also where all the patients had to queue up for their nightly dose of happy pills. Tonight it was Kinsey's privilege to dole out the brain candy. Will and Mark joined the line that formed in front of the window. Great, medication. They got the same thing night after night. Kinsey pushed Mark's pill through a gap in the protected glass. Mark looked at the tablet. It had a tiny name printed on its glossy sugar coat. "Hypnosil?" He scowled, not for the first time. "What's this shit do, anyway? How come we all have to take it?" Kinsey scowled back. "So you'll be good and docile when I kick your ass." Mark shrugged and swallowed the pill. But he'd asked a good question. Why were all the patients on the same drug? They couldn't all be ill with the same malady, could they? When Will got to the window, he couldn't help but wonder the same thing. It was supposed to be a general dispensary, but nearly every bottle on every shelf contained the same damn drug, Hypnosil. Kinsey pushed Will's medication through the hole in the glass. Will ignored it. His attention had been seized by a news report playing on the portable TV over Kinsey's shoulder. This just in. Tonight's murder in this quiet suburban neighborhood of Springwood. Details on this tragedy remain unavailable. A reporter was standing in front of a place Will recognized. It was 1428 Elm Street. If only this damned glass wasn't muting the sound. Will ignored the pill and pointed at the TV. Hey, could you turn that up?" Kinsey turned the TV off. "Sorry, Will. You know the rules." Will became frantic, scrabbling at the glass. The other patients became increasingly upset as the dark-haired boy started to pound on the glass window, growing more angry with each blow. "Turn that back on, man! I know somebody that lives in that house! Come on, turn it on!" Kinsey sighed. "Here we go again." He tilted his head down and gave Will a cold, piercing stare. Then slowly, deliberately, Kinsey opened a black case lying on the desk of the dispensary. Inside the case was a syringe. Mark quickly pulled Will away from the glass. What are you doing, man? You want 10 cc's of that pink tranquilizer in your ass? That was Lori's house. Will was still hyper. They said something about a murder, man. I gotta go there, Mark. I gotta see if she's okay. Back to Springwood? Asked Mark, sounding frightened. You want me to start having nightmares again? Will didn't want to hear this. Don't start with the dream demon shit, man. You know that's all just in your head. Yeah? And who are you? The poster boy for sanity? You're the one that told the cops Lori's dad killed his wife. That's true. He had. Will had told the cops that he had seen Dr. Campbell murder his wife. He had seen Lori's dad kill Lori's mom. And for that, they'd locked him away. For being the only witness to a brutal slaying, Will had been confined to Weston Hills and shot full of hypnosil. Mark led his friend over to the corner of the common room, where patients could play games. On one of the tables was a chess set. On another was a backgammon board. A Monopoly game was scattered across the floor nearby, as if someone had swept the whole board into the air in the middle of a game. Another patient, a mute guy, held a checkers board in his hand. He bumped it into Mark's arm repeatedly, but Mark was too caught up in his fight with Will to notice. Right, said Will, and now it looks like someone else got killed there. You think that's a coincidence, Mark? 2 murders in the same house? Mark had had enough. He turned on the patient with the checkers board and shouted, Kurt, how many times do I have to tell you? I don't do checkers. I'm an Uno guy. Go find the damn Uno deck and we'll play, okay? Now go. Mark seemed to deflate in his chair, his anger with Will spent on poor Kurt. Look at us, Will. Look around you. We're institutionalized. We're not going anywhere. And at that precise point in time, it looked as if Will had no choice but to agree. The rest of the night was an endless expanse of nothing, as far as Will was concerned. He couldn't get his mind off Lori, and off that TV report of a murder on Elm Street. And what about the other things Mark had said? Would they ever get out of Weston Hills? Will lay awake on his bed. Lori was in danger. It was her father. It had to be. He was going on a rampage like that night 4 years ago, when Will had seen him with the knife. Shit. The lights were low. Will shared a ward with Mark and a number of other patients. But for all the total lack of decoration in the place, the room could just as well have been a prison cell. Mark lay in the adjacent bed. He was also thinking about the future and the past. He had met Will here at the hospital. They hadn't known each other before then. Will had told him some paranoid story about being locked up under some kind of conspiracy. From the day they'd met, Will had insisted he'd been sent to Weston Hills to keep him quiet. He said that only he knew what had happened at 1428 Elm Street that night 4 years ago. No wonder he totally bugged out when he'd seen tonight's news. But Mark wasn't sure if he even believed the guy. Maybe the whole Dr. Campbell thing was all part of Will's delusions. Maybe Will had had some kind of breakdown brought on by Campbell standing between him and Lori. Whatever the answer, Will was Mark's best friend, and Mark truly wanted to believe him. Mark sighed and turned over on his bed. He looked up at a photo of his family taped to the wall. Dark in the dim light, there were no question marks over why he himself was a patient at Weston. Around the same time Will was going through his problems, Mark's brother Bobby committed suicide. And soon after Bobby's death, Mark had started having nightmares, violent nightmares. His parents had panicked. They were worried that Mark too might hurt himself, so they sent him here. Turned out that other kids had been killing themselves and having bad dreams as well. Many of them had been brought to Weston. Mark had overheard one of the doctors refer to the teenagers as suffering from adolescent hysteria syndrome. So that's what Mark had, AHS. And it sounded like what Will had as well. Only Will wouldn't accept it. So they never talked about it. Until now. Quietly, so as not to disturb the other patients in the ward, Mark said, My parents are a little whacked. I mean, they love me and everything, but, one son in the loony bin, the other committed suicide. He paused, but Will said nothing. You listening to me? Asked Mark. He knew Will was awake, but still no answer. And he knew why. Lori. Lori had been Will's girl. You really care about her, don't you? All these years and you're still convinced you saw her father do that? Will cut in angrily. "I know what I saw, Mark. Fuck what the doctors tried to get me to believe. I gotta know if she's okay." Mark sat up and looked over at Will. He didn't like to see his pal like this. He didn't like the fact that there was nothing they could do about it. No one they could talk to. No one they could call. And Mark didn't like the fact that the two of them were going nowhere, except maybe on a four-wheel ride to D-Wing. "All right," Mark nodded. He reached a decision. It was quiet in the common room now. The fruitcakes had taken their hypnosil like good dogs and had gone to bed, leaving Kinsey alone in his cramped office to watch some TV. Someone stepped up to the dispensary window. Holy, Kinsey relaxed. It was just one of the kids, Mark. Except that the next thing the male nurse knew, Mark was throwing his night clothes off and shouting and banging his fist on the reinforced dispensary window. The idiot clambered on one of the tables, hooting and capering like a demented monkey. He turned and waved his bare ass at Kinsey through the window. Enough was enough. "Oh, you want to play?" Kinsey switched off the TV, reached for the black case containing the syringe full of tranquilizer, and picked up a nightstick. As soon as Mark saw Kinsey reach for the baton, he ran off down one of the long hospital corridors. There was no way he was going to let that moron beat on him. Well, not until Mark had achieved what he had set out to do. Moments later, the hospital hallways were alive with the sounds of the chase. Mark shouting and slamming doors, and Kinsey and two orderlies running after him, calling out every threat imaginable. For Mark, the whole escapade was scary but fun, even though he knew it would end only one way. Eventually, drugged and drowsy and sporting a few new cuts and bruises, Mark was strapped down tightly onto his bed by the orderlies. Kinsey opened up his little black case and gave Mark a second jab of sleep juice. "Sweet dreams, monkey boy." Then the nurse and the orderlies were gone. As soon as they were out the door, Will got up out of bed and crept over to his friend. The restraints on Mark were really tight. "What the hell was that for, man?" Will asked. Mark smiled and flicked his eyes down towards his left hand. Will looked and saw that his friend was clutching Kinsey's keys, his swipe card, and his ID badge. Mark had been beaten. He'd been drugged. He was drowsy and exhausted, which is why Will had to half-carry Mark as they crept along the quiet road that would lead them away from Weston Hills Psychiatric Hospital. But the slow speed didn't matter. It would be hours before anyone would even know they were gone. Will was ecstatic. "Mark, you're a fucking lunatic, you know that?" "I know you are," slurred Mark. "But what am I?" Somehow the two of them had beaten the odds. They had escaped from that rat bastard place and were on their way to Elm Street. Chapter 6. It was dawn before Dr. Campbell arrived at the police station. He was shocked at just how bad his daughter looked. Judging by the state of her eyes, Lori hadn't slept a wink all night. When he got there, the two of them just hugged, the sheriff standing by almost as if Lori was being released from custody into her father's care. By the time they arrived back at home, they found the police still at work. There were a few cop cars outside the Campbell home, 1428 Elm, and there were officers in almost every room of the house, searching, sifting, checking, looking for anything that would help identify Trey's killer. Campbell offered to make breakfast, but Lori wasn't hungry. However, she did agree to a glass of orange juice. It would refresh her, help her stay awake. The two of them were alone in the kitchen. Lori could hear the cops milling about upstairs and in the adjacent living room. She felt awful, tired, numb. Dr. Campbell finished pouring Lori's juice. He glanced back over his shoulder. Good. She wasn't paying attention. While Lori wasn't looking, Dr. Campbell took out a small bottle of pills from inside his jacket. Then he opened the bottle and dropped one of the pills into the glass of orange juice. Written in tiny letters on the pill was one word: Hypnosil. "You sure you didn't see anyone?" Campbell sounded casual as he put the tumbler down in front of Lori. "None of us did, Dad. I already went over this with the police." "It's just—" It was hard for him to find the right words. "I don't know what I'd do if I ever lost you. You're all I have left." Lori looked at him warmly. Her father was a proud man, and he didn't have much of a sense of humor. But the death of his wife, Lori's mom, had changed him so much. Lori knew how much he loved and needed her. Yet since her mom's death, her dad had seemed distant, as if he always had something on his mind. But despite all his own troubles, Dr. Campbell had been a great comfort when Will had run out on Lori like that. "I'm not going anywhere," Lori reassured her father. "I promise." Campbell smiled tearfully, then checked himself and stiffened. Suddenly he was the doctor again. "Look at you," he said. "You're exhausted. We need to get you to bed." Lori blanched. What if that guy, that nightmare creature, came to her again? What would she do? "I don't want to sleep right now, Dad. I want to be with my friends." She stood up. She still hadn't taken a sip of her orange juice. "I don't think it's a good idea for you to go to school today, honey. You've just been through something very traumatic." "Look, I can't stay in this house. I just need to get out, okay?" Lori saw a look of hurt cross her father's face. "Don't worry, I'm fine, really." She gave her best shot at a reassuring smile. It seemed to work, and she turned to walk away. Campbell quickly picked up the full glass. "Hey, drink your juice at least, okay?" But Lori wasn't interested. She hurried out of the kitchen, leaving her father no choice but to pour the untouched juice down the drain. Sheriff Williams had been in the living room while Lori walked through. She had glanced into his eyes before turning her face to the floor and pushing by him. Williams watched her go, his face thoughtful, concerned, resolute. Lori didn't know the half of what had gone on last night. The situation was getting worse. He looked grave when he joined Dr. Campbell in the kitchen. "Will Robbins and the Davis boy escaped from Weston Hills last night." Campbell had to grab hold of a chair to steady himself. Rollins? The boy who had accused him of murder? "Jesus," he whispered. "It's all coming apart again." Sheriff Williams laid a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, we'll find them. Get this thing contained." That's all they could do. Police by containment. That's the way it always was with Elm Street. These bad spells came along, and the police closed them down. Sure, the police thought they'd got it licked, each and every damn time, but it just kept on coming back. But not this time. This time, Sheriff Williams would fix the Elm Street problem, for good. Lori had changed her clothes and put on her backpack ready for school. But her mind hadn't been on her preparations. All she could think of was that terrible nightmare, the child with the mutilated eyes, those kids with the nursery rhyme, and that creep, that ugly burned creature with the razor fingers. He'd rushed at her, appearing for a moment, then disappearing, then suddenly reappearing again, jerking closer and closer, until bursting to sick life right in front of her face. And there was something else. She had seen something else in her dream. Her house! Lori picked up her things and ran down the stairs. Her dad was with that creepy sheriff, so she didn't bother to say goodbye before heading out the front door. The door! Making sure none of the cops out front were watching her, Lori closed the front door, then carefully used her house key to scratch at the yellow paint. Bit by bit she scraped at the paint, but it remained definitely yellow. It was just a dream. She sighed, relieved. Just at that moment her key scraped through to the red paint underneath. The same red she had seen in her dreams, where the house had been derelict and the door had run crimson with blood. No! Lori reeled at the implication of her discovery. The door used to be red. In her dreams, she had seen how the house used to be. But how could she? She had to see her friends, stat. Springwood High School would have looked familiar to anyone who had ever seen any of the countless TV shows set in high school. The gates, the yard, the corridors, the main hallway. The school was alive with kids, teenagers, and young adults carrying bags, clutching books and folders, and generally looking happening and connected. But Springwood High was consistently below national averages for academic performance. And when the school did make the news, it was for all the wrong reasons. Just like today. All the kids had heard about the murders last night. Everywhere Gib and Kia turned, people were talking about them, whispering, shooting cautious glances. Kia could handle all this. She didn't care what the other kids thought. She was more concerned with what had actually happened over at Laurie's place. But Gib was losing it. Her boyfriend had been killed. She had fled the house with Trey's blood on her hands. And now she was here on a bright sunny morning, constantly on the brink of tears. Laurie ran up the stairs to meet them, and they went into a group hug. They needed this. "I wasn't sure you were going to come, Gib," said Laurie, who was totally aced by Gib's reply. "Blake's dead too." "What?" Laurie's mind reeled. "Last night, like late last night," continued Gib, "stabbed to death. Same with his dad." "It's bullshit," Kia snapped. "The police are blaming everything on Blake? Like it's some kind of Columbine thing or something? They're saying he went crazy. Killed Trey, killed his dad, then took his own life." Again, Kia noticed all the other students watching them. "I guess everyone saw it on the news," she said. "They all know. This is so messed up." Gib wasn't so tough. Sick and tired of being stared at being talked about, at being treated like a freak. Gib broke away from her friends and shouted out for the benefit of all the kids slowly filing into class, each and every one giving her a pitying look. "Stop staring at me!" For a moment there was total silence, and then the school bell rang. Despite Sheriff Williams' concern over the Weston Hills escape, nearly all his resources had been swallowed up by the triple homicide. He had only one officer to spare on Will and Mark. The obvious thing to do was to watch their homes, where their parents lived, so he assigned the officer to watch over the Rollins place. The sheriff was more eager to lay his hands on Will Rollins. Mark Davies could wait a while. So it was by total good fortune that the two fugitives had gone to Mark's place. They'd waited until Mark's parents had left for work, then went inside and grabbed a change of clothes. By the time they'd finished, they looked just like any other Springwood teenager, which was a good thing, as they were now making their way on foot by the back streets to Springwood High. "Hey," said Mark suddenly as they jogged along, "what if Laurie's not here? What if she was the one that died?" Will stopped and grabbed Mark by the arm. "Don't say that, man. Don't you fucking say that." All right, just calm down. We'll find her." That first morning back at school had been rough. One way or another, everyone had wanted a piece of the three of them. Either people expressed their condolences, or they asked intrusive questions. Some of the other students even made jokes of it all. When class finished, Laurie hurried out into the hall before anyone else could bother her. Kia tried to keep up, but Linderman got in the way. Linderman didn't even notice Kia. He was too busy trying to catch Laurie. Laurie?" Laurie stopped and turned. "What is it, Linderman?" Linderman was the class nerd. There was nothing particularly offensive about him. He wasn't a grade A fool or anything. He just happened to have a bit of a baby's face and sometimes a total inability to say the right thing. At times, his lack of emotional maturity was just too much to handle. "Well," ventured the boy, "I heard what happened, and I just wanted to, express how to let you know how sorry I am, how sorry I was." Kia came in at the end of his demonstration of embarrassed stuttering and just rolled her eyes. Laurie tried to be polite, but it still felt awkward. That's sweet of you, thanks. Right, okay, but, if you need someone to talk to, you know, to maybe grieve with, I could... Kia had heard enough. Let me give you a tip, Linderman. Put your hormones back in the box and quit while you're ahead, okay? We don't have time for data dork right now. That was Linderman's problem. He meant well, but suddenly realized that he had been cracking on to Lori in a really dumb way. He didn't know how it happened. He'd wanted to tell her how sorry he was about the murder and everything. Right, he said, nodding with intense agreement. Sorry. His eyes flickered longingly towards Lori, as he forced himself to basically get the hell out of her face. Kia was not impressed by his performance. She watched him slink away into the crowd. Every day it's the same thing with him, she said in Lori's ear. He's like one of those fucking frou-frou dogs that keeps humping your leg. Lori was looking over the way at Gib. Heck no. What was she doing with that stoner? Freeburg and Shack, the guy who put the moron in Jock. Freeburg was handing out bright yellow cards to any student who walked by, but Gib was clearly the focus of his attention. Hey, she was almost a celebrity right now. That's why you should go, Gib, he said. Be among friends where it's safe. There's gonna be a lot of love there for you and Trey. Lori saw someone take one of Freeburg's flyers. He was promoting yet another of his infamous raves. Fuck it, you're right, said Gib. I could use a few dozen drinks. Atta girl, bellowed Shack. Let your freak flag fly. Gib saw Lori and Kia. You guys coming? She asked, walking over. What was it with Gib? First Trey and Blake, now Freeburg and Shack? Was she some kind of asshole magnet or something? I don't know if I'm up for it, said Lori. I barely slept last night, and when I did sleep, I had the worst nightmare. I can't believe you had to sleep in the police station, said Kia. I'd have nightmares too. This was different. There was a man. More like a monster, really. They called him Freddy. He was so real. So? What did he look like? Asked Gib, not really caring. Why was Lori telling her of all people about her stupid nightmares? What Gib had seen was real. Trey, Blake, and Blake's dad had been killed. The murderer hadn't been caught and was still loose on the streets of Springwood, and here's Lori talking about her fucking dreams. He wore this dark brown hat, and his skin was horribly burned, and on his right hand he had these long razor fingers. Lori was so lost in trying to recall what the nightmare guy looked like that she didn't notice a number of passing students had stopped to listen. Then there was these little girls singing this strange song, like a jump rope rhyme. 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. Who is that? Lori turned her eyes wide open in surprise and saw Mark jogging across towards them all. Will and Mark were just across the street from the school when they first saw Lori and her friends. They'd tried to cross the road at the same time, but Will nearly ran into a passing car, so had to hold back while his friend went on ahead. Now all the students simply looked at Mark as he told Lori what he knew. You know why they sing that? He said. It's because that's when Freddy comes for you, while you sleep. You're lucky to be alive. Everything about Shack's broad-shouldered body language said he thought the little blonde guy was a jerk, but Lori knew different. This intense-looking kid with the tic somehow knew the words she had heard in her dream. Who is he? She asked Mark. Please tell me. There was a lot of bitterness in Mark's voice when he replied. He'd had too much history with this whole nightmare thing. He'd come here as a favor to Will, but when he heard Lori talk about that guy in that nightmare, the whole world had turned 360 for him. Suddenly, this was as much Mark's fight as it was Will's. Mark spat the words out. A child murderer that some parents from around here burned alive. But then he came back for revenge in our nightmares. It's funny, huh? No one ever told us about him. Lori's head started to spin, and she swayed a little as if she was going to faint. She looked terrified, and her fear was spreading through the rest of the kids. "He's real?" she said. But what? How do you—" Mark motioned for her to be quiet. "You want some free advice?" he said, almost cruelly. "Coffee. Make friends with it, okay?" Suddenly a hand grabbed Mark from behind and pulled him away. Another guy, his friend, who seemed more than familiar. "That's enough, Mark. Can't you see you're scaring her?" That face, that voice, out of nowhere after all this time? Could it be Will? He stepped forward, a look of grave concern on his face. I thought you might be in trouble, so we—" But Laurie wasn't listening. Seeing Will's face right now, after everything that had happened, after her nightmare, after Mark's crazy story, seeing Will again like this was just one final shock too far. Laurie's body went limp, and she dropped to the ground. Laurie's mind was in turmoil. As she lay there on the floor of the school hallway, she could hear everyone whispering, talking about her. The other students had seen her faint and had crowded around her. "She passed out. They know who killed Trey. Name is Freddy Krueger. Child murderer. Said he comes in our nightmares. Blake's dead. Drink your juice. Will?" The voices all blended into one another until coming to a sudden stop with one single word said in that one single voice. "Boo!" Her friends had carried Laurie to the school nurse's office, where she lay in bed, tossing and turning in her sleep. There was a frosted glass window in the wall over Laurie's bed. Something rose and stood up on the other side of the glass. The frosting made it hard to see anything about the person in detail, but you could see the colors just fine. Whoever it was that was on the other side of the rippled glass, he or she was wearing something in red and green. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Chapters 5 and 6 of Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization by Stephan Hand. And again, kind of like the last chapter, these two chapters were pretty much just a cut and dry version of what was in the movie. But I do like the fact that we get some added inner monologues with the characters. I really do enjoy that. I did notice a couple slight differences from the movie. Did you catch them too? If you did, let me know in the comment section below. There was a couple slight differences. I love the character of Linderman and Freeburg and Shaq. Oh my god, I love Freeburg and Shaq. I cannot wait for the scene with Freeburg. The whole, "I don't know, man, but that was one pissed off goalie," you know? Or, "Why don't you go find yourself a pig to fuck?" Like, so many scenes coming up in this book. I cannot wait to read. Maybe some of those scenes will be slightly different than they were in the movie. Who knows? But I'm looking forward to that. I am enjoying this novelization. Yes, the prologue and Chapter 1 were vastly different than what we got in the movie. And, you know, it might have kind of spoiled me a little bit because I was expecting everything to be that way. But honestly, that was asking for too much, because these novelizations, especially when they're written after the movie is already out, they pretty much stay true to the source material, and I should have expected nothing less than that. So really, I'm not disappointed with these chapters. I'm still enjoying it. I enjoy the characters. I enjoy the character development. And there's so many great scenes from this movie that I cannot wait to get to. But when Laurie gets reunited with Will in the hallway, that's a pretty cool scene. Pretty powerful, too. You know, because all this is hitting her at once. You know, she's sitting there talking about her nightmare, and all of a sudden, this person she's never seen before walks up and says, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you, you know, and starts telling her exactly what she's been dreaming, and then explains to her who it is. You know, this child murderer, and he's come back from the dead to kill us in our nightmares. And just putting myself in her shoes, that would just be terrifying. You know, in retrospect, I wish Freddy had got more kills in the movie, and perhaps he gets more than one kill in the book, you know. He only got one kill in the whole movie. That always blew my mind. But he had some awesome scenes. So, this is, like I said, this is chapters 5 and 6. pretty cut and dry, but a few little changes there and some extra things, some extra inner thoughts. Let me know what you guys thought of tonight's chapters, and if you're enjoying this book so far, and if you're looking forward to the next upload, which will be out very soon. Because honestly, this is one of those books that I just can't put down. That's every day I look forward to narrating more of it. And I really hope that you listeners are just as excited as I am about this one, and just as excited to get into more of it. And I'll be back very soon with more of this book. And until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and pleasant dreams!
Hi, this is Jeffrey Reddick, creator of Final Destination.
Greetings, Slashaholics. This is David Bergantino, author of the Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror books, the Bard's Blood horror Shakespeare books.
Hey guys, this is Jason Brooks, Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th Vengeance.
Hey, this is Slasher Pepper.
Hey everybody, it's CJ Graham, Jason, Friday the 13th Part 6.
This is William Pattison, known to Friday the 13th fans as Eric Morris.
Hi, this is Deborah Voorhees from Friday the 13th Part 5.
Hey folks, this is Adam Marcus, director of Jason Goes to Hell and Secret Santa.
Hello kiddies, this is John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper.
Hi, this is Kane Hodder, better known as Jason from Friday the 13th, Victor Crowley from Hatchet.
And you are listening.
You're listening.
And you're listening.
And you're listening.
Just want to make sure you guys know you're listening.
You are listening.
And you are listening.
And you are lucky enough to be listening.
Okay, boils and ghouls, you are listening.
You are listening
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
The 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
to the 80s Slasher Librarian. Keep listening, or I'll kill you.